The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode 144.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Enterprise episode called Dear Doctor. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
You know, they said that this is like the best episode of the first season, but I haven't reviewed the entire first season with that in mind, but... Hi, Dom.
Hi. And Father Cory Stika. How are you doing, Father Cory?
I kind of agree with Jimmy.
Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek on Facebook, where we're at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, and retweet the show on Twitter, where we're at SQPN. We love to see you on our social media. Yes, the Dear Doctor. This is a first season episode. It's the 13th episode of the first season, and it is basically, it's a Dr. Phlox story. It focuses on Phlox, and it's the first time, like the first really development of the Phlox character, really kind of digging into who he is and that sort of thing.
And that's fine. You know, we need to get to know our characters, and they need episodes devoted to them, and that's fine. It's also, though, trying to be a prequel Prime Directive episode. So we're out here, we don't have the Prime Directive yet, but we've still got to wrestle with those issues, and so this is going to kind of set us up conceptually for the future existence of the Prime Directive. Well, and it just manages to spectacularly fail to combine those elements in a satisfying way.
And you also get the Captain Archer suddenly having to realize what the Vulcans were trying to do on Earth, and now he's in that position where he's trying to, how do we handle this technology that we know that these other races don't, and how do we help them to do it in a way that's safe, and that kind of gets thrown in there as well.
And of course, the most awkwardly phrased line at the end where Archer says, "Someday we'll have some sort of directive." So like it just felt like it kind of clunked across the screen. I don't know. It
is kind of clunky. I don't know that I had the same reaction, but it is clunky dialogue. Yeah.
Can we say though that at least it had the best character in it, Porthos? So I mean, of all the entire series, the best character was in there. At least for a little bit. I always love
Porthos. He's the cutest dog ever. So we do open with Phlox feeding his menagerie. So it's the beginning of the day, and he's feeding his menagerie.
And I like how he has this bio-based medicine. That's nice. I like that. That makes sense for, okay, it's going to be alien. It's not going to be exactly like Earth medicine, but that's cool.
And to emphasize the alienness of Phlox is at one point he eats the live slug that he's been feeding to the one of the creatures. So we get that emphasis on Phlox as, yes, he's denobulant, not human. And he's apparently got this correspondence with a Dr. Lucas, who's a human, who's in the interspecies medical exchange, and he's on Denobulus. And I like the fact that his email comes in, and so Hoshi hand delivers it from the bridge.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, on a plastic see-through square with microchips embedded in it.
And disk.
It's about the size of a floppy disk. Yeah, and I'm going, really? You can't just send that to him over the network. No. But even more, because it's just a voice message. It's not like some complex 3D holographic thing that goes on for hours. It's just a voice message. But Hoshi, when she finds out the nature of the correspondence that he's talking to Dr. Lucas about, it's just personal observations and things like that. She's like, "Oh, I had a pen pal when I was young, and my pen pal was in Brisbane, Australia, and it was such a window on this exotic world." And I'm going, Yeah, you can really tell what generation the writers of this grew up in.
Yeah.
Hoshi's pen pal is so 1970s. I mean,
Yes.
today, I remember when the internet first became commercially available in the 90s, and I'm getting emails, and someone is saying, greetings from a tiny little stone cabin in Ireland. And yeah, okay, that was an exotic thing in the 1990s for both of us.
Yes.
But now it's like, okay, what's your time zone, and let's arrange a Skype.
Right.
Not a big deal.
We talk to people around the world all the time.
Yeah. Well, I laugh about the little cartridge, the little floppy disk or whatever, because, of course, that's a conceit that they did because, of course, the 1960s Star Trek TOS had the little data cassettes they had to use. And so they wanted this conceit of, yes, even before the Enterprise, they did that. Of course, the Discovery goes, yeah, forget all that.
Yeah, Discovery said, prequels, we'll show you what a prequel is. So we do get this voiceover of Phlox dictating his letter in return, and we get some interesting insight into the Denobulan culture and species, including he mentions the rigors of mating season on Denobulus, and something about separating the two combatants.
Yeah.
which leads to some interesting imagination about what the reproduction is like among the Denobulans.
Well, a lot of species do have, during the rut, you will have combatants to be able to breed with the females.
Right.
Oh, yes.
And then he does, and then I did like this where he talks about the loneliness of being an alien among the crew, and also on top of that, being the doctor, which also somewhat separates you from the crew. You're their doctor, so there's a necessary separation. So I thought that was interesting, and we get a scene of him sitting alone in the mess hall.
Also, at movie night, and they're watching For Whom the Bell Tolls, he's observing the emotion. He's not really interested in the movies, but he's interested in observing the crew's reaction to the movies.
Yes.
Right.
And he's there with a lady named Crewman Cutler, who we've seen once before, and she'll show up once again. And she's like throwing herself at him, and it's taken him a while to catch on.
Yes.
And okay, so this outsider perspective on humans is fine as far as, writing goes in terms of a concept. It makes sense. I'm on board for that. But this is a really lazily written episode because the main plot cannot be bothered to show up for 10 minutes, which is basically a quarter of the runtime. I mean, classic Doctor Who does better than that. This whole thing is nothing but character stuff for the first 10 minutes. And then when we get to the actual first appearance of the main plot, they find this spaceship in space. It's got faint life signs on board. They bring over the crew of this ship, which is like two guys, although we only see one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And his planet has a plague going on, and it's like, totally can sympathize with that.
Yeah.
So they ask for help, and so I was thinking about how Next Gen would have handled this. Now, number one, Next Gen, the most successful of the revived Star Trek series, would have had this be with, if not the very first scene, the first thing that happens after the credits.
Right.
And then we would have tense shots of the Enterprise racing through space to get to this other planet at a high rate of speed to help with the plague. And there would have been urgent music conveying the sense of urgency, and it would have felt much more energetic. Here, after the revelation of these people have a plague going on, we have the Doctor doing another entry in his letter saying, I've been asked to take responsibility for 50 million people. And then we're immediately, after that dramatic statement, we immediately go to the mess hall where he's given Hoshi a grammar lesson, and they're eating food and having romantic gossip about Crewman Cutler. And they have this dark lighting, which, pulls down the energy of the scene, and this slow, gentle music betraying the sense of urgency that they're trying to establish.
Yeah, it is. You're right. I like the idea, the contrast between the way TNG would handle this versus how Enterprise handles it. It's like, all of that that the Doctor's Day stuff would be in the teaser, the pre-credit teaser.
Mm-hmm.
They would have crammed it into a minute and a half or 2 minutes at most, and then we'd get into the meat of the story. But yeah, instead we have this meandering, and I can't tell whether they really want to explore this crisis, or this is just a exploration of the Doctor's character, who we haven't managed to get around to really doing much with this season.
And I definitely think the crisis was just the
excuse.
The excuse to show the Doctor in this kind of situation. And, you don't have the scene of like Dr. Crusher rushing around, getting everything ready, getting all the bio beds ready and everything. You don't have anything like that. And so even the scenes where they're on the planet is more about showing the Doctor doing the work, or, his personality and everything as he's doing the work, than it is the actual crisis they're dealing with. It's like, oh, by the way, we got this medication. Here's how you resolve it. And now we're going to have the relationship again.
Well, at the end, they try to cram all that in, the moral and ethical problems, and it all gets kind of crammed into the end of Act 4. But I should probably be explicit about what's going on. So it's a pre-warp civilization. They translate their language in about 45 words.
Yeah. Also, it is pre-warp, but they've had prior contact with warp civilizations, which is, so when Archer, and originally, you may recall, the original version of the Prime Directive in the original series was like, don't contaminate pre-warp civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It wasn't, don't interfere with the future evolution of people. It was just, okay, let's put the pre-warps on a kind of restricted basis so we don't expose them to too much. And so when Archer checks with T'Pol, she says, well, they've already had contact with pre-warp, so I don't see us getting involved being a problem.
Right, including name drop of the Ferengi, which who are unknown at the time. So the plague has no cure. They're hoping to find an advanced civilization to help them. They've already met two warp-capable civilizations, and so Phlox says, I'll try to help. When they go down to the planet, they discover that there are two different species of humanoids coexisting on the planet. One is an underclass called the Mink, and they're told that the Mink are immune to the disease.
Yeah, the upper class are the Valakis, and I don't see why one is superior to the other. We're just told that. We're not effectively shown that. And even Phlox is like, oh yeah, they appear to be primitive and stuff, and I'm going, no, they don't. Yeah. They just appear to be an underclass.
Yes, they're kept in these primitive conditions.
Yeah. And also, I like the idea of, okay, here's a planet where two subspecies survived and got along together. One of them didn't wipe the other out. Mm-hmm. We had other human subspecies here on Earth, but Homo sapiens sapiens is where it's at now. And I like seeing a planet where that's different. But if you do have an integrated society, they're not going to be speaking a different language. Because that's the first sign that the Mink are different, is Hoshi's translator doesn't work for their language. Right. And no, you're going to be able, if you have an integrated society, even if they have a different native language that they speak at home, they're going to have a common language with the people they're working for. Right. And so that was a little unrealistic, but okay, whatever. We've got this other species. What's interesting, and I like how they show this to us from Phlox's perspective, is that this seems to be a functional relationship between the Valakis and the Mink. All the humans are weirded out because of the history of racism and slavery on Earth, and which they don't really get into deep, but Phlox notes that the humans are deeply suspicious of this relationship and want to become advocates for the Mink. But the Mink don't seem to need or want an advocate. They seem fine with the way things are. They also seem to be much more intelligent and quick to pick things up. Like, one of the Mink starts using human English words, as he's learning them. And he's doing surprising things like organizing Dr. Phlox's blood samples for him by family line and marriage arrangements and things like that to help speed the research. So I'm going, how are these guys primitive. This is pretty advanced stuff they're doing.
Yeah. And they
Right.
kind of hand wave at that, saying that they're going through this evolutionary leap at this moment, and things like that are going on.
Yeah.
It looks like they
I-
evolutionary leapt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They've already passed that point. I did kind of key on where they said how the mink were put in places that the food doesn't grow, that it's kind of undesirable places. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's not a reference to Native American reservations or anything.
Yeah, right. In a way, or any people who are oppressed by more powerful people, right? And Phlox, in his research on this disease that is, killing many Valachians, learns that it's not a virus but a genetic mutation. And I'm thinking, how advanced is the medicine on Valachius that they didn't figure this out?
They've got deep space probes that can go out. I mean, that's why the ship was out there. It was hoping to make contact with a warp-capable civilization.
Yeah.
Well, they've also got the ability to produce the medication that Phlox gives them.
Right.
So I mean, it's not like there's, by the way, we're going to give you the tools to produce it. Like, no, here's how you produce it. Like, you already have the ability to produce it. So
yeah, and from a 2021 perspective, it's like, do you know how long it takes to make that many doses?
Yeah,
we do now.
We're learning that.
Could you maybe help them with a replicator or something?
Yeah, right. It turns out that it's not. So, like I said, it's not a virus, and it's a genetic mutation in the Valachians that's been going on for thousands of years, but accelerating, and they'll be extinct in 2 centuries. And so, what we've set up is this situation where the mink, the underclass, are about to become the dominant species on the planet peacefully. They're not going to, where in most cases where there are 2 humanoid species, one wipes the other out. In this case, they'll peacefully become the dominant species as the other species dies out. And meanwhile, Phlox is trying to get the humans to see that, why should we be upset about the Valachian mink arrangement? Everyone seems happy. This is just a cultural difference, and then does it by explaining to Cutler about the Denobulan polyamory marriage. And
at that point, he's starting to lose her because she's on the side of the mink, or what she thinks the mink need to have done on their behalf. And Phlox's cultural relativism is a bit of a turnoff to her. And she's by the end of the episode, by the end of that scene, she slow friend zones him.
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, let's just be friends for now. And so it was interesting from a human perspective, seeing him lose her interest, because earlier she was just throwing herself at him, and now he's really losing her over this. Got to be a supreme cultural relativist on these things,
right?
Yeah, and so the crux of the problem that they're dealing with here, it comes to the fore at this point, where first it's of the Valachian astronaut asking Archer to give them warp drive technology, so they can keep searching for a cure because they don't have a cure for this disease.
The idea being, if they had warp drive, they could go much further, faster, and find other civilizations that might be able to help them.
Right.
And Archer says the people you might find might not be willing to help you, which is true. They come across Klingons.
Yep.
But he talks to T'Pol and realizes they're just not ready. Even if, and T'Pol points out, even if you gave them our schematics for warp drive, they wouldn't be able to build this, and they don't have the experience working with antimatter, and they could, like one antimatter accident can totally ruin your whole planet.
Exactly.
And so they're just not ready for warp drive, and that's where Archer starts to realize what the perspective of the Vulcans were when they first met humans. Unfortunately, Archer doesn't take the easy way out with the warp drive question and just say, I'm sorry, that's a state secret.
Yeah.
It's like how to build a hydrogen bomb. We don't share that with everybody. It's too dangerous. Right. And so, he could have said that. But in my notes, this episode is so sad. It's just everything is sad about this episode after we get into the main plot.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I was thinking it's a lot like if you went back to 1915, you traveled in time and gave them the plans to a nuclear reactor. Like, would they be able to build a nuclear reactor?
No, they didn't even know.
Eventually?
They didn't even know about neutrons in 1915.
Right, right. I mean, eventually, over years, they, like we did, figure it out. They might do it a little faster. They'd probably hurt themselves a lot in the process trying to do it. But yeah, so they don't even have the infrastructure to build the parts to build the reactor. You know, it's just not even there yet. So,
and I like the point where Archer's like, well, we could stay for a little while and help. And T'Pol goes, yeah, we did that 70 years ago. And we're still there, or 90 years ago, or whatever it was, you know.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm starting to understand the Vulcans. So Phlox then goes to Archer and says, I don't think a cure is ethical. I don't think curing the Valachians is ethical. It's an evolutionary process that's replacing the Valachians with the Menk as the dominant species on the planet, and apparently evolution trumps all.
Yeah, so this scene is another one that takes place in the mess hall, and it's dimly lit, and it has slow-moving music. Mm-hmm. And actually Phlox comes in on Archer, who's like having a drink or something, and Phlox gets a piece of pie, and so this is a random conversation that comes up, but that's the essence of the conversation. He's saying, I want to let nature take its course on this planet. And Archer's first response is, to hell with nature. Mm-hmm. And that's my first response too. And it's my last response. Right. Evolution, if you believe in divine providence, evolution can have goals, but mankind and intelligence is part of God's providence.
Right.
If you don't believe in God and evolution is a blind process, then it doesn't have goals. And therefore, whatever scenario you can foresee playing out evolutionarily is meaningless. Right. So you're either an active agent in the process, if you believe in a God overseeing all of this, or if you don't believe in a God, then it is you have zero reason to honor where you see an evolutionary trend going. And Archer points that out to Phlox. Yes. He says, you're a doctor. Every time you save a patient, you're interfering in evolution, which is true. Right. So now Phlox then comes back with a very interesting line, which is, I'm also a scientist and I'm obligated to consider the larger issues. Wow, is that different than the attitude that scientists were portrayed as having in the aftermath of World War II? It's like, hey, we just invent the bombs. We don't decide the ethical issues.
Right,
you know?
Right.
And that was the narrative about science, the amoral scientist, through the next 3 decades of pop culture. So it's very interesting to have Phlox having owned the ethical aspect of being a scientist, but unfortunately, he's just flat wrong. If unless you think there's a God, in which case you're an active participant in the moral calculus here, you have no reason not to save these people who you could save. And Phlox admits to Archer that he's already got the cure, and he doesn't want to give it to him. And I'm going, you unmentionable set of words. You can save these people. Go ahead and do your job and save them, and let evolution play out. They've already got a functional relationship with the mink.
That's the big thing, is they are living in peace together. There's no, sure, the mink, they seem happy. Are they at the same level? Are they maybe they're not being treated as well, but that can evolve. That relationship can evolve, especially as you say, the mink are making an evolutionary leap themselves.
Yeah, right. And they've been making progress already. They've been developing and frankly, in evolutionary terms, they're likely developing because they are in contact with a technological situation that is putting selection pressure on the genes that control their intelligence. If you take away that selection pressure, then their intelligence could easily decay.
And give the Valachians a chance to be better than they are, than you say they are. Give them the chance to recognize the mink and let them grow, and let the Valachians grow morally and ethically through this. Like, if you leave them be, and they do go extinct in several centuries, who's to say that in 150 years they're not a much better people deserving of surviving in your calculus? I mean, that's what Phlox is making a calculus here, that somehow the Valachians are not deserving of species survival.
Yeah, and this exposes a big flaw in the writing process for this, because the solution they craft, which is make the hard choice, which we are told is the right choice, even though they've given us no reason to think that, and let evolution take its course on this planet, resulting in the death of the Velakis, they're making that decision in the absence of a prime directive, and not even the initial prime directive, where it's just don't contaminate pre-warp civilizations. This is the refined next generation stupid prime directive of don't interfere with the evolution of a culture. And it's like, why would these characters be thinking in those terms? That piece of Federation ideology is not in place yet, and they've told us it's not in place yet. Right. So they should not be honoring, in the end of the episode, some rarefied, stupid founding philosophical principle that won't even exist for 150 years.
Right.
And this principle of non-interference, they're interfering just as much by withholding a cure, as giving them would be. It just doesn't make sense. If an alien life, species had shown up 100,000 years ago and given Neanderthals a leg up, then yes, they would have dominated. But they didn't. I mean, they make this that's the argument that Phlox makes. If Neanderthals had been given that leg up, they would have dominated and humans would have been suffered. Yes, right. But they didn't.
And
there
also,
wasn't an alien species.
And also, Neanderthals and humans were equal technology level. It's not like Neanderthals were driving, flying cars and humans were crawling through the trees. These were equal technology levels, and just one species ended up succeeding, the other diminished and disappeared. We've got an advanced species that they have the ability that they could live with the second species in peace and harmony. They could become both equal partners on this planet very easily within, say, 100 years. And there's nothing to say other than the slippery slope of evolution. And it really is we've started down this slippery slope, so we can't stop it. And it's very much that argument. And it really is. Let's take God out of the picture. Let's put science there instead. And let's put evolution there instead. And that these processes are a God of their own that we can't interfere with. Right.
There's an assumption also that, given the way things are going, that they will inevitably end up in war, and that the compassionate thing to do is to circumvent the war between equal species by letting the Valachians die off. But they've existed peacefully so far.
Apparently for thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So who's to say?
Also, okay, now I want to write a story where we re-encounter the mink after a couple of 100 years, and the Valachians have all died. And after first contact with the mink discover that Dr. Phlox had the cure and didn't give it. What do the mink think at that point? How compassionate is this Federation that's claiming to be all oopy-goopy compassion sloshing all over everywhere? You let these people die, and we had to watch them die.
Yep. Wow. And what did that do to the society that the mink were in, which were supporting the advanced society was supporting them in a way that they didn't have to worry about food. They didn't have to worry about their needs. They're being taken care of. And now that society disappears. Did they take that society over, or did all of society collapse? And are they actually worse off now than they would have been if, and who's to say as the advanced species starts dying off, who's to say that's not going to cause war in its own?
Yeah, because they're a stabilizing factor in the society. And Phlox himself says these people are going to be dead in 200 years, but it may take millennia, thousands of years, for the mink to complete their leap up to the level of where the Velakis are.
Right. It feels like a kind of eugenics judgment on the Valachians with a species that has deficient genetics, and it's uncomfortable, frankly,
in a whole bunch of ways. Now, it's interesting to note the studio interfered with the ending of this episode.
They did.
Apparently, originally, Phlox was going to disobey Archer in some way, which would make an interesting character choice for him. And the studio didn't, and I gather that he was going to withhold the fact that he had the cure from Archer.
Right.
But the studio interfered, and stupidly, they interfered in a stupid way, because they didn't want to see the supporting characters being at conflict with the captain at the end of the episode. Unfortunately, they didn't then do the thing they should and have Archer order Phlox to give the cure despite his ethical misgivings. Instead, they had to drag Archer's viewpoint over to Phlox's, or that's what the writers did, was drag Archer's view over to Phlox's, so he ends up not giving them the cure at the end of the episode. And this we are told in one of Phlox's letter voiceovers that this is the right decision, but I don't buy that at all. And so I think, guys, you've lost the audience. The audience has never been as sold on extreme applications of the Prime Directive as the show creators have been. And every time you go there, like in Star Trek Insurrection, and you want to do a hard choice Prime Directive thing, and you're giving it an unreasonable interpretation, you lose the audience.
I agree. There's a line in that mess hall scene in the conversation between Phlox and the captain, and they have this exchange, and it's supposed to go in the direction that the writers want it to go. I think it undercuts their entire argument for non-interference. Because Phlox says, evolution is more than a theory. It's a fundamental scientific principle. Forgive me for saying so, but I believe your compassion for these people is affecting your judgment. And Archer says, my compassion guides my judgment. And that should have been the last word.
That's exactly what it should be.
Also, I want to come back on evolution as a fundamental scientific principle. Well, so is gravity, and that doesn't mean we can't build airplanes.
Right. Well, evolution just describes the process by which things change. It doesn't mean that there's one path of evolution that is permissible.
It's not a die hard fast rule. We can do things to quote unquote cheat evolution.
Well, we do every time we save a person's life.
Yeah.
Right. I find it interesting to contrast this with an episode that we recently did from TNG, the episode called Evolution, and where Dr. Stubbs, the scientist in that episode, throws that in Crusher's face, says, Doctor, every time you kill a virus in somebody, you're affecting evolution. You're going in the face of it. And so, Star Trek has already, although in that case they again rejected that argument for some reason. And so, this episode, I fundamentally disagreed with the viewpoint, and it shows a particular viewpoint. And Jimmy, when you mentioned before, like after World War II, pop culture was very suspicious of scientists. I think this episode is part of the trend that shifted sometime in the 90s, I think, to scientists can do no wrong. That idea that science trumps all, that there is a quote unquote science that is the law.
I think one thing it does bring up that is good is the idea of scientists need to be thinking about the ethics of what they're doing. Yes. And that in itself is not a bad thing. I just feel, I think all three of us agree that the ethics that Phlox uses here are flawed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the show's overall treatment of the Prime Directive is flawed, and probably one of the best moments in the franchise regarding that is in the Q&A short trek where Spock and Number One are locked in an elevator, and he's asking questions and says, "Has it ever occurred to you that the Prime Directive may be ethically indefensible?"
Yes.
Yes.
I wonder if that just comes out of like all the fans and probably the writers of that themselves agreeing with that. All right. So any other thoughts on this episode? Anything any notes you have we didn't cover?
Father?
The only one scene I got a kick out of is where Phlox is doing dental work on T'Pol and asks her a question as her mouth's open, because none of us have ever had that happen when we've gone to the dentist.
Yeah, that's right.
They get really good at decoding what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jimmy?
So the best parts of this episode are the character moments, but there's too much of that. This is a lazily paced episode that is slow all the way through and doesn't even have the main plot glimmering into existence until the 10-minute mark, which is a quarter of the runtime. It is, even after the main plot is introduced, it is slowly paced. Ideas are given short shrift. The direction undercuts the sense of urgency by having everything dimly lit with slow-paced, soft music and lack of dialogue and lack of visual dynamism. It's just a lazy, sad episode with some occasional moments of, oh, that was a nice character moment.
Yeah.
I agree.
One thing I did forget to mention, Crewman Cutler was actually intended to be in a second-tier recurring character. Unfortunately, the actress, Kelly Waymire, died of a heart condition after the first season was filmed.
Yeah.
And so they just decided not to recast the character, but just cut the character out altogether.
Yeah. Very sad. Very sad to see that. Rest in peace. All right. I think that should do it for today. Let's take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Andrew M., Lee V., Alaska Tom, great name, Tom, Pat F., and Steve S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to create and continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. Now's a great time to become a StarQuest patron thanks to a generous gift from a StarQuest supporter. When you start a new Patreon monthly pledge at sqpn.com/give, the first 3 months will be matched by an equal amount from our donor, which will support all our shows, including this one, making your gift go even further. And we're close to reaching, we're more than halfway to our $2,000 goal for new monthly pledges. So now's the time to become a StarQuest patron. Visit sqpn.com/give today. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear from you on what you think of this Enterprise episode called Dear Doctor. You can let us know by commenting at sqpn.com/trek or on our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time and we'll be discussing the first season Discovery episode, The Wolf Inside. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, teek teek.
You know, teak is a word that has been speculated by some to be in proto-world, the first human language. Based on analysis of different currently existing language families, teak may have meant finger. And so when I was thinking about teak, I was like, oh, finger.